Hello there, this is Pilgrim. Welcome back to my road trip during which we will be exploring the French southeast. This is day 4 and today we will be visiting Vienne. During the last episode we took a closer look at Cluny and Lyon, which makes it quite easy for me to show you where Vienne is. Like I already told you last time, Lyon and Vienne are only about 40 minutes apart, which makes them close enough to show on the same map while still maintaining enough detail to recognize them properly. The reddish city center of Lyon being helpful with that, of course, as is its considerable size. Now, while Vienne is a lot smaller, it still stands out at least somewhat, due to the terrain it is located in. Vienne lies directly at the Rhône, you see, in a valley probably carved by the river ages ago. But whatever its origin may be, this valley, in combination with the hills surrounding it, makes it easy to spot the town on this map. For one, local geography prevents the town from spreading too far, keeping the density of buildings high due to the limitation of available space. For another, the slope of the eastern hills are flush with dense vegetation, generating a dark green line, underlining the town, so to speak. Zooming in, it should be easy for you to identify the old town by now. But just in case, it is all the way up at the northern end of Vienne. Right about here, where we will enter the town somewhat south of it. Roughly in this area, starting directly at our first site. This is the so-called Vienne Pyramid. Local legend has it, it is the tomb of Pontius Pilatus. As far as I know, he is generally referred to as Pontius Pilate in the English language. But whatever the case, it is the very same person mentioned in the New Testament, the 5th prefect of Judea, who presided over the trial of Jesus Christ, ordering his crucifixion. However, for as spectacular as this sounds, it is most likely a fabrication, as most scholars seem to agree that what the structure actually is the single remains of the Roman circus of Vienne, from the 1st century, as I recall. Not to be confused with the Roman amphitheater, or, as I prefer to call them, arena. The Roman circus was a racetrack for horse and chariot racing. Here's a drawing of a Roman circus, courtesy of English Wikipedia. As you can see, there's a structure bearing a remarkable resemblance to the Vienne Pyramid in there as well. Afterwards I moved on to the city park, encountering this duck standing on one leg. I wasn't there for the duck though, nor for the park itself, to be honest. I mean, don't get me wrong, for it is a nice place, but I did have another reason to visit, which was this piece of Roman road. There's also a Roman sarcophagus right next to it, just in front of the tree to the left. Can you see it? Here, let me point it out for you. The road itself seems in excellent shape, way better preserved than the one we saw in Besançon on the first day of our trip. You are even permitted to walk on it. At least I think you are. Why else would there be a staircase leading down? Anyway, I was still outside Old Town at this point, if only just. But that would change soon. Leaving the road behind, the next site for me to visit was not far at all. Here it is, and just in case you are wondering why this house looks so, let's say, restricted, I will tell you in a second. But maybe you can figure it out for yourself if I give you a slight hint, looking at the same location from a different angle. Does this help? How about now? This is me shooting in either direction along the front of the building, by the way. I just put them next to each other to illustrate my point. By now you probably guessed what this is. And just in case your guess is what is left of the Roman city wall of Vienne, you are right. Apparently they wanted to preserve those fragments but still needed to utilize the space, which is why they built all around it. As far as I can tell, this is the end piece of the preserved section, and while there might be more, I think we got what we need for the moment. There was also a panel close by, containing some information in English as well as German, and while the content differs ever so slightly, I will stick to reading you the English version. The wall around Vienne was built at the beginning of the Roman Empire, after permission had been given by the emperor. It most probably follows the same course as the walls built by the Celtic Allobroges. The wall, almost 7 kilometers long, with 58 towers, goes around the hills, but doesn't include the southern plain or the districts beyond the Rhône. The southern section of the wall, which can be seen here, was located between 2 gates. The wall, almost 4 meters thick, was covered with hewn limestone, which has since disappeared. The walls were narrower on the hillsides, but must have been at least 8 meters high. One part of the Gallo-Roman walls was reused from the Middle Ages up until the end of the 18th century. Today, the Rue Boson has taken the place of what was the main north-south thoroughfare and its gate. With that cleared up, we could enter Old Town now, but there's just one last thing I wanted to take a look at first, which was this roundabout just slightly west of our previous location. How shall I put this? I know. When you have so many Roman ruins, you can use them to decorate your roundabout. Yes, that sounds about right. Of course, there's no way for me to tell for sure if they are legit, but given the sheer number of Roman ruins in this area, I would assume that they are. They sure look the part. On another note, the river you can just about see behind the roundabout is the Rhône, by the way. I told you we would get to see it when we were in Lyon, remember? Well, here's a taste. Finally entering Old Town, the first building I visited was this church. 5th century, I believe, making her one of the oldest in France. I think I've read somewhere she is supposed to be even the oldest in general, but you always have to be very careful with statements like this, for they are usually either a matter of interpretation or simply plain wrong. However, the point that she is very old cannot be argued at all, although she does not serve as a church any longer but became a museum instead. Unfortunately, one that was closed at the time, so I couldn't get inside. I've seen pictures of the interior though, and you may be relieved to hear that it is very rough. So, if you were afraid to miss out on something very chic, that is not the case here. While I couldn't get inside, it was still interesting to look at the exterior, especially from the side. Do you notice anything? Well, I tell you what came to my mind when I was looking at her. I found the difference in building material between the main building and the front tower rather striking, as well as interesting. It very much looks like a Roman basilica. They simply added a front tower to it later on, thus turning her into a church. Given her age, this certainly sounds plausible to me. After all, the 5th century was when the Western Roman Empire saw its final years. Next up was Vienne Cathedral, featuring a nice, if not the most elaborate, Gothic flamboyant facade. Now, what can I tell you about her? For one, she is not a Notre Dame. For another, she is, strictly speaking, not even a cathedral. As you probably know by now, if you have watched some of my videos, cathedral is a rank, and as it is common with ranks, you can gain it, but you can also lose it. Vienne Cathedral used to be a cathedral, but was demoted to co-cathedral at some point in time. Despite that, she still seems to be referred to as cathedral in everyday life to this day. I guess it simply stuck. Probably because people were used to it. So let's join in on that and call her a cathedral as well, for the sake of simplicity, if nothing else. Like with Lyon Cathedral, many of the statues were lost at one point or another. I previously stated that usually the French Revolution was responsible for that, which seems to be true in most cases. But there's also another event in the history of France, which was infamously responsible for devastating churches, which would be the French Wars of Religion. A Catholic-Protestant conflict that occurred much sooner. Which event was ultimately responsible, I do not know. Of course, it is also entirely possible that both played a part. Judging by the looks of it, she had some cleaning work done to her not too long ago. Can you see how much brighter the towers are compared to the middle section? Especially the stones of the main gate are considerably darker. Moving around the western facade, looking at the southern side, we can observe the same thing, since there is a clearly visible dividing line, showing us where they stopped working on her. The little heads under the roof of the side aisle and the gargoyles directly beneath the roof of the tower are interesting details to notice. We can further see two distinct Gothic styles right next to each other, manifesting in the tracery of the windows. Gothic flamboyant in the tower and Gothic rayonnant in the side aisle, indicating that the later one is older. A trend that continues as we look down the length of the church, towards the choir, as we can even see a round window without any tracery at all. Even the stones seem more withered towards this end, especially at the very far section that also features something that looks like a Romanesque window, which has been sealed shut. All in all, clear indications that the choir is the oldest part, and the church seemed to have been built starting at this end, moving west. Walking towards the choir, I discovered this slightly hidden Romanesque window, which somehow seemed to have survived the flow of time intact. The overgrowth and the weathering sure make the section look ancient, which becomes even more obvious if we turn around looking back, basically putting one of the towers next to the choir via perspective. The difference could hardly be more obvious. Talking about the choir, since it is surrounded by other buildings standing fairly close to each other, it is difficult to shoot. At least if you don't have access to any of those properties and are restricted to taking pictures from ground level, like I was. Moving around to the northern side, I found more space to work with. Although it very much looks like this has not always been the case, since it seems that there used to be another structure connected to the church at this end, as suggested by the remains of a Gothic rib vault and traces of masonry apparently leading nowhere. That aside, all the rest of this half of the church seems to mirror the other, or at the very least, comes within shouting distance of doing so, making it quite similar to the casual observer, even if there are some differences still. Like, for example, the row of columns just below the roof. Interestingly enough, some of them appear bent, a case of stonemason humor, no doubt. Having basically rounded the church, it was finally time for me to enter, and I did so using this door. As far as cathedrals go, this is as basic as it gets. You may have noticed it when we rounded her, but this church does not have a transept, therefore also no crossing and not even an ambulatory. Just a nave, 2 side aisles and a choir. That's it. Despite the circumstance that parts of the building appear to be from different periods, thus covering a wide span of time, the stained glass windows seem to do the same, but to a larger degree. While some give the impression of being genuine medieval ones, others are quite modern. Although the age of the stained glass windows seem to roughly correspond with the age of the part of the structure they are embedded in, this is not always the case and can be quite misleading if you try to adopt it as a general rule. I will say this, however, the ones of the lancet windows, those are the ones at ground level in the choir, sure seem to be the oldest to me, making them a perfect match. While some of the windows are clear, there's also a great number of lighter motifs, especially in the clear story, making this a well-lit place overall. As far as the masonry is concerned, there is nothing particularly noteworthy that I could find. My favorite piece being that little crab-like creature in the center of this picture. Isn't it cute? As for the meaning of this creature collection, my best guess is that those probably are the zodiac signs. With that cleared up, we will move on shortly. But not before I give you a little overview of the total interior of the main body of the church standing in front of the altar facing west, which is the opposite direction I usually go for. But those are the pictures I happen to have at hand. At least this will add some variety, I suppose. It's not the most spectacular view, of course, but I'm glad I made sure to capture the large window over the entrance, since those are always especially interesting to me. With the cathedral left behind, the next site I encountered was a temple of a different kind, namely a Roman one. It goes without saying that this predates the cathedral by quite a bit. It also provides a good example of how much of a development architecture made in the span of time separating the two. For the cathedral we just visited is a much more complex structure in comparison. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Roman architecture and find this temple very beautiful indeed. But if you look beyond the ornaments for a moment, breaking it down into its basic components, all that remains is basically a couple of straight walls and pillars upholding a roof. But let's not ruin the mood by overanalyzing things, for what you are looking at here is in fact one of the best preserved Roman temples in all of France. There's just one other I know of that is able to compete with this one, and guess what? We will be visiting that one as well, just not today. As for the reason why this temple is so well preserved, I happen to know it, so I can tell you. When you think of the Roman Empire in terms of religion, what do you think of? Probably gods like Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and so on. When it comes to gods, the Romans had many. But the rise of Christianity changed all that. While Christians were persecuted early on, they did manage to become the dominant religion within the Roman Empire over time. Of course, this was a lengthy and complicated process, but it did happen eventually. So when you are talking about the late Romans, they also happen to be the early Christians at the same time. It's an oversimplification, of course, but it brings the point across. Now, what did the formerly hunted early Christians do after they took over? Well, if you know anything about humanity, the answer should not come as a surprise to you. Yes, that's right. Of course they started to suppress other faiths themselves, including the one formerly known as Roman, which led to the demolition of quite a number of Roman temples and therefore is one of the reasons why so few of them survived intact. Of course this does not answer our question now, does it? True, but it does lay the groundwork for doing so, as this temple was turned into a Christian church at a certain time during the late Roman Empire, effectively making it immune to any attempts of vandalism by overzealous Christians. I suspect that the building was modified in one way or another in order to facilitate that change, but partially rebuilt in a later era, when an interest in history and the desire to preserve it took over. So much for that. But now it is time for us to move on, for there are far more Roman ruins to see. And we don't even have to go far, for the site happens to be just around the metaphorical corner. As a matter of fact, there are several actually, two of which are of Roman origin. But let's not get ahead of ourselves and look at the closest one first, which would be those arches. Even though they appear to be isolated structures at first glance, they are in fact part of a larger field of ruins, of which they happen to be the most memorable features. While not the largest remaining fragment, they are among the larger ones, and also the only one to retain a certain amount of ornament, even if strongly degraded. I also find the yellowish warm color of the stone more pleasing to the eye than most of the rest, that happens to be of a dirty grey for the most part. It is a fun area to explore in any case, for there are many details to discover if you can spare the time. It's also very much a work in progress area, since they were still digging for new artifacts when I visited all the way back in early 2024. So if you ever happen to go there yourself, you may find that there is even more to see now. However, if you think that was impressive, you have seen nothing yet, for the next one is way more massive, topping even the Roman theatre of Lyon we saw just the other day. I am talking about the Roman theatre of Vienne, which, according to German Wikipedia of mid-2026, is even bigger. According to mentioned article, it is even supposed to be the largest one in the entire area formerly known as Gaul, which is quite a statement to make. The only reason we were unable to see this giant structure so far is because a large part of the city happens to be located on a slightly upward slope, therefore hiding it, in case you are approaching from the lower regions close to the river. Of course, that is about to change now, since we are on our way up there as we speak. These pictures all have been taken at the foot of the theatre. But since the area is fully enclosed by walls and fences, it was somewhat difficult to take a decent one. And it was not for lack of creativity on my part either, for I distinctly recall climbing at least one wall to get a better view. Not that it did much, but it did provide me with this picture, as well as the following video. As annoying as it was to me when I was there, the reason for this area being sealed off is actually a rather awesome one. It's simply due to the fact that, despite being close to 2 millennia old, many of those theaters are in active use again today for concerts and other sort of events, as is this one. I don't know about you, but I think that is pretty amazing. I also climbed the hill on the side opposite to the theater in the hopes of getting a better look at it from there, but as you can see, this did not work out as well as I had hoped. For one, it wasn't that high. For another, there were still other buildings on there as well, partially obscuring the view. But the biggest issue turned out to be that it is simply a bad idea to look at a semicircle from the side, since you can see only part of it in any case. However, before we move on, trying to locate a better position, let me address another topic first. You probably noticed her already, for she is rather obvious. I'm talking about the chapel on top of that hill, well above the theater. Of course we will get to see her later anyway, since I went up there as well. But there's one thing about her you can't see better from over here. I'm talking about the fact that she was built on some kind of fortification, the origin of which eludes me at the moment. But you can clearly see the base of one tower and substantial wall fragments to the right of her. It was also the first time I came across a Virgin Mary statue propped up on a tower like this, and while I did not know it at the time, this is quite typical for France. They actually have a lot of those, as I learned on my following road trips, this one being on the smaller end in fact, or at the very least not particularly large. I would love nothing more than to jump forward to my third road trip to show you the massive one I saw in Les Plus à Voler. But that will have to wait for quite some time, I'm afraid. Anyway, I diverge, back to the topic at hand. Having walked up the wrong hill, there was only one thing left to do. Walk back down again and try again. This time I went past the theater and took a quick close-up through the fence, from the left side of it. It's a very improvised picture, of course, but it did capture some details you can't see on any of the other ones. Taking the road up put me parallel to the town's cemetery. I'd call it a happy accident, but I had planned for that to happen, so I can't. Meanwhile, things started to look very city wall, gate towerish at the other side. Walking uphill made my body heat rise, while the day cranked up the temperature all by itself as it progressed. It was noon already, 12:42 to be precise. But according to my travel plan, I was well on track and therefore quite relaxed. The view from up there was pretty neat and I was looking forward to reaching the top. As for the castle over there, it was one of the things I did not visit. So just in case you are wondering, Vienne has more to offer than what I'm showing you. Naturally, I couldn't do everything. And here we are, This is the view from the very top of the hill. I very much liked it. The weather was also great. That's another thing I remember about Vienne. The nice weather. There wasn't a single drop of rain anymore from there on forth, with the last drops falling in Lyon. Maybe I was finally far enough south. Maybe I was just lucky. Whatever the case, we will only be seeing skies like this from now on. Well, mostly at least. It still tended to be foggy in the morning and the temperature still fell at night. But of course you can't see that on the pictures. While we're up here, I would like to mention some of the other sites I wasn't able to see. And while you might think that this could also be one, it isn't. It's a college. Some of those come with their own churches attached. But I don't think you can visit her. One thing you definitely can visit, on the other hand, would be the Roman Museum over there, on the far side of the Rhône. As you can see, it is a fairly new building, but considering how many Roman remains there are in this town, I'd expect that they have some pretty impressive pieces. Talking about the Romans, here's the theater, directly at my feet. I was very much dead center at this point. It doesn't get any better than this. I mean, look at that view. That is quite something. Wouldn't you agree? You don't get to see something like that every day. The cathedral stands out pretty well too. Can you spot it? Yes, there it is. You can even see one of the two Roman arches. Even the roof of the temple is visible, if you know where to look. Now, you may be thinking, okay, that is an impressive theater, sure. But Lyon had two. Well, guess what? So does Vienne. It's right over there. Or at least it used to be. There's hardly anything left. Believe me, I checked. For this was the hill I went up before, remember? As far as I know, this constellation of two theaters so close together only ever happened in Lyon and Vienne, making both very special. Well, we are almost done for the day. There is not much left to do, except of course to divert some attention to these two. The Virgin Mary statue does not require much of it though, for it is just that. The door to the tower was locked. I doubt it is intended for visitors anyway, probably more of a maintenance access. The chapel is a different story, and while I didn't do any research on her, that doesn't mean we can't look at her. Therefore we shall. I suspect it's a fairly new one, at least she gives that impression. The interior is very nice and clean. I don't have much to say about this one, except that I like the Gothic revival pulpit she comes with. Then again, it is only a small chapel, so we might as well leave it at that and head on. I'm still glad I visited it though. Here is what she looks like from behind, by the way. I decided to head back down via the cemetery we saw earlier. I was curious if I could manage to catch both the chapel as well as the castle in the same picture. As you can see, I managed, but could only do so with this piece of wall in the foreground. The cemetery is pretty neat itself. While it is a bit cramped, its location on the side of a hill makes it much more interesting than it would be otherwise. Sadly, there is no room for trees or any other green spaces on there. The graves are pretty close, in many cases touching each other, making for a high density of stone. I bet this place heats up like hell during summer. Back in town, I went straight for this church. It's a Romanesque one, quite ancient, although they also shoehorned the Gothic window in there. The tower looks especially old, the base even more so than all the rest of it. Interestingly, they used rubble stones as well as larger chiseled ones throughout the entire structure, with a tendency of the rubble to be found in the lower parts. Arriving at the front, this, once again, appears very Roman. I'm talking about the facade at the front, of course. But don't think those Gothic flamboyant windows up there fool me for even a single second, for they were very clearly put in later on only. What else is there to say about this one? I have to admit I'm not sure anymore. I think she's a museum as well. I only know that I did not go in. So she was either closed or just about to open. Either way, I decided to head on. It wasn't that late yet, only 13:48. But my next location, Auvergne, was almost 2 hours away and I didn't want to be as late as the day before. Therefore, I left Vienne early, with the last picture taken at 14:23. Of course you have to add a couple of minutes on top of that, not to mention the travel time. Anyway, so much for Vienne. It really was a pleasure to visit, I assure you. I hope I managed to bring that across and that you enjoyed it as much as I did. Have a nice day and take care. And don't forget to come back again for day 5, when we will be visiting Auvergne.